In the 1970s, there were very few television faces as familiar as Demon Wilson's. Every week, millions of families welcomed him into their living rooms without thinking twice, laughing along as Lamont Sanford navigated the chaos of his father's world. He became part of the routine of American life, a steady presence during an era when television still felt communal and intimate. Yet fame has a strange way of simplifying people, reducing them to characters frozen in time. To most viewers, Wilson was Lamont, and nothing more. But behind the steady gaze and patient frustration of that role lived a man wrestling with questions far bigger than ratings or applause. His journey was never just about entertainment. It was about identity, purpose, and the quiet courage to step away from everything people expect you to want. The rise of a cultural icon in the 1970s. When Sanford and Son premiered in 1972, few could have predicted how deeply it would embed itself into American culture. Adapted from a British series, the show found new life through sharp writing, fearless humor, and the electric chemistry between Red Fox and Demon Wilson. At just 26, Wilson faced the daunting task of holding his own opposite one of comedy's most commanding personalities. He succeeded not by overpowering Fox, but by grounding the madness. Lamont Sanford became the emotional anchor of the show, the voice of reason surrounded by chaos. Audiences saw themselves in him, loyal, tired, loving, and endlessly patient. The show quickly became one of the highest-rated programs on television, drawing tens of millions of viewers each week. For Wilson, fame arrived fast, loud, and overwhelming. Life after Sanford and Son. When Sanford and Son ended its original run in 1977, Demon Wilson didn't disappear. Like many successful actors, he tried to build on the momentum, moving into new sitcoms and film roles that allowed him to stretch beyond Lamont Sanford. Some projects were short-lived, others quietly overlooked, but Wilson continued working steadily through the late 70s and early 80s. He explored comedy, drama, and even family-oriented films, proving his range to those paying close attention. Still, something had shifted. The industry that once embraced him now seemed less fulfilling, more transactional. Success no longer brought satisfaction, and the thrill of recognition faded faster than expected. What looked from the outside like a perfectly respectable acting career was, on the inside, beginning to feel incomplete, even hollow. A quiet spiritual turning point. Somewhere along the way, Demon Wilson began asking himself questions that fame could not answer. The applause no longer filled the silence when the cameras stopped rolling. He spoke later in life about feeling spiritually restless, aware that something essential was missing. Rather than ignoring that feeling, he leaned into it. Wilson experienced a profound spiritual awakening that reshaped his priorities and his understanding of success. He became an ordained minister not as a publicity move, but as a deeply personal commitment. Faith was no longer something private or abstract, it became central to how he lived. He began writing and speaking about spirituality, honesty, and the emotional cost of chasing validation. This shift wasn't dramatic or scandalous, it was quiet, intentional, and deeply transformative. Walking away from Hollywood on his own terms. Perhaps the most remarkable part of Demon Wilson's story is not his rise to fame, but his willingness to step away from it. At a time when many actors fight desperately to stay relevant, Wilson chose distance. He turned down opportunities that conflicted with his values and gradually withdrew from the industry altogether. This wasn't a rejection of acting, but a refusal to let it define him. For nearly 2 decades, he lived largely outside the spotlight, focusing on ministry, writing, family, and personal growth. To Hollywood, his absence felt like a mystery. To Wilson, it felt like peace. He accepted the possibility of being forgotten if it meant staying true to himself. That kind of decision requires a strength rarely celebrated in entertainment culture. Returning only when it truly mattered. Years later, when Demon Wilson did return to acting, it was not for fame or nostalgia. It was for meaning. His later appearance in a small, thoughtful drama reflected a man who no longer needed validation from the industry that once defined him. The role was modest but intentional, marking a quiet, full-circle moment rather than a comeback tour. It reminded audiences that while he had stepped away from Hollywood, Hollywood had never truly left him. More importantly, it showed that walking away doesn't erase talent or legacy, it simply reframes them. Wilson proved that you can pause, step back, and still contribute something meaningful when the moment feels right. His return wasn't about reclaiming the spotlight, but about honoring a craft on his own terms. A legacy bigger than a single role. For most viewers, Demon Wilson will always be Lamont Sanford, and there is nothing small about that legacy. Sanford and Son continues to air decades later, finding new audiences who laugh just as hard as the original viewers once did. But limiting Wilson's impact to a single role misses the deeper truth of his life. His legacy is about balance, conviction, and courage. He showed that it's possible to succeed in entertainment without letting it consume your identity. He demonstrated that stepping away is not failure, but sometimes growth. In an industry built on constant visibility, Wilson chose authenticity over attention. That lesson may be quieter than a punchline, but it lasts far longer. The man beyond the camera. Away from the screen, Demon Wilson was many things: a father, a writer, a minister, and a mentor to those who sought guidance rather than fame. Those closest to him often described a man who valued honesty, humility, and reflection over status. His later years were not defined by red carpets or headlines, but by connection and purpose. When news of his passing reached the public, the response was not sensational but respectful, marked by gratitude rather than shock. He lived a full life, not just a famous one. That distinction matters. In a world that often equates visibility with value, Wilson quietly reminded us that who you are when no one is watching may matter most. Remembering a life lived with intention. Demon Wilson's story is ultimately about choice. He chose to embrace fame when it arrived, to question it when it felt empty, and to walk away when it no longer aligned with who he was becoming. Not everyone gets that clarity, and not everyone has the courage to act on it. His journey invites us to reconsider how we define success and fulfillment. Was he a television legend? Absolutely. But he was also something rarer, a person who listened when his inner voice asked for change. As audiences revisit Sanford and Son, they may laugh at Lamont's patience and timing, but behind that performance was a man quietly building a life rooted in meaning. That is the legacy Demon Wilson leaves behind, one that endures beyond reruns and applause.